My name is Chen. I am 28 years old, and last September I walked into the quarterly review meeting at Tech Vision Solutions in San Francisco, thinking it would be just another performance evaluation. The conference room smelled of stale coffee, and the hum of the projector filled the awkward silence as our team settled into the black leather chairs. My manager Robert sat at the head of the table, his laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen behind him. For a moment I let myself hope that maybe this time my work would be acknowledged. But as Robert cleared his throat and began ranking each team member aloud, his eyes landed on me with something that looked like disdain, and he said I was the least valuable employee on the marketing team. Laptops froze, someone's pen clattered onto the table, and I felt every eye in that room turn toward me. That meeting didn't just shatter my confidence. It set in motion something none of them could have anticipated. Keep listening, because by the end of this story, you'll see how the employee they tried to erase became the name their competitors couldn't stop talking about. Let me take you back 3 years before that meeting, back to when I first started at TechVision. I was 25, fresh out of a marketing master's program, and desperate to prove myself in the brutal San Francisco tech scene. TechVision was a mid-sized software company, around 150 employees, that built project management tools for enterprise clients. It wasn't a household name, but it was stable, growing, and I needed the experience. My interview had gone well. The hiring manager, Sarah, had been warm, telling me they valued fresh perspectives. I accepted their offer for a junior marketing manager role at $75,000 a year, knowing it was below market rate but telling myself it was a foot in the door. My first week, I met David Harrison. He was 32, a senior marketing manager who had been there for 5 years, and from day one it was clear he was untouchable. During the team introduction, Robert praised David's strategic thinking, his ability to manage high-profile clients, his deep understanding of the industry. David smiled easily, his perfectly pressed button-down crisp under the fluorescent lights, his handshake firm and confident. What I didn't know then, what took me months to piece together through overheard conversations and LinkedIn research, was that David's uncle sat on TechVision's board of directors. That connection was never officially disclosed, but it explained everything. I threw myself into the work with everything I had. My first project was a product launch campaign for TechVision's new feature, a collaboration tool that integrated with Slack and Microsoft Teams. I stayed late most nights, sometimes until 10 p.m., researching our competitors, analyzing user data, crafting messaging that felt human rather than corporate. I built a content calendar, designed social media assets in Canva since we had no design budget, and pitched an influencer partnership strategy that would cost us almost nothing but required hustle. Sarah, who oversaw both David and me, gave me a nod of approval when I presented the plan. But when the campaign launched, the company newsletter credited the strategy to David. His name appeared in bold at the top of the announcement, mine buried in the contributor list. I told myself it was a mistake, that maybe the communications team had mixed up the names. But it happened again. And again. A blog series I wrote that drove 40% more traffic to our site was attributed to the marketing team generally, while David's name appeared in the next all hands as the architect of our content strategy. A webinar series I organized that generated 200 qualified leads had David presenting as the host, thanking me briefly as his assistant. I started documenting everything, saving drafts with timestamps, keeping email threads that showed my work, not because I planned to use them, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining it. The quarterly reviews became a ritual of disappointment. Every 3 months, Robert would gather the team, pull up his performance spreadsheet, and rank us from highest to lowest impact. David always sat at the top, his metrics padded with projects I had executed. I hovered in the middle, my actual accomplishments invisible under the weight of his shadow. When I tried to speak up once, suggesting that project ownership be clarified in our tracking system, Robert waved me off, saying we were a collaborative team and individual credit didn't matter. But somehow, David's salary kept climbing while mine stayed frozen. By my second year, I had learned the unspoken rules. Stay quiet, work hard, don't make waves. I watched as David coasted through days, taking long lunches, leaving by 5 p.m. while I picked up the slack. When a major client campaign for our enterprise tier was at risk of failing because David had missed 3 deadlines, I stepped in on a weekend and rebuilt the entire presentation deck, rewrote the pitch, and created backup materials. The client signed a $500,000 contract. At the team meeting, Robert shook David's hand and called him a closer. My name was mentioned once, in passing, as support staff. I want you to understand what that does to you. It's not just frustration, it's a slow erosion of your sense of reality. You start questioning whether your work is actually good, whether you're being too sensitive, whether everyone else sees something you don't. I found myself working later and later, as if more hours would somehow translate into visibility. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always said no. My apartment became a second office, my couch covered in printouts of campaign analytics and competitor research. I told myself it would pay off eventually, that hard work always gets recognized. I was wrong. The breaking point came in September 2024. TechVision had just closed Q3, and Robert scheduled the quarterly review for a Thursday afternoon. The marketing team filed into the conference room, 8 of us total, and I took my usual seat near the middle of the table. David sat closest to Robert, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone who had nothing to worry about. Robert opened his laptop and the projector flickered to life, displaying a spreadsheet with our names listed in rows and various metrics in columns. Robert started at the top. He praised David first, talking about his leadership on the enterprise campaign, his strategic vision, his ability to manage stakeholder relationships. David nodded humbly, and a few team members clapped politely. Robert moved down the list, calling out each person's contributions, some positive, some with gentle criticism. My heart rate picked up as he got closer to my name. I had spent Q3 managing 2 major product launches, writing all the content for our new website redesign, and running a paid ads campaign that had brought our cost per lead down by 35%. I had the data ready in my notebook, just in case. Then Robert got to my name. He paused, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet, and something shifted in his expression. He looked up at me, his voice dropping into a tone I had never heard him use before. Emma, I'm going to be honest with you. Looking at the numbers, looking at the feedback from other departments, you're ranking as our least valuable team member this quarter. The room went silent. I felt my face flush, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I opened my mouth to respond, but Robert kept going. Your projects lack strategic thinking. You execute tasks, but you don't think big picture. Other team members have raised concerns that you're not a team player, that you don't collaborate well. I need to see significant improvement, or we'll need to have a different conversation. I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the table, my coworkers avoided eye contact, some staring at their laptops, others suddenly very interested in their notebooks. Only Jake, one of the senior developers who often worked with marketing, looked uncomfortable, his jaw tight. I wanted to scream, to pull up my laptop and show the emails, the project files, the data that proved everything Robert said was a lie. But my voice was trapped in my throat, shame flooding through me so intensely I thought I might be sick. The meeting continued. Robert moved on to budget discussions, next quarter's goals, upcoming campaigns. I sat frozen, my vision blurring at the edges, barely registering the words around me. When the meeting finally ended, people scattered quickly, the energy awkward and tense. I stayed in my seat for a moment, staring at the empty screen. Jake lingered near the door, waiting until the others had left before walking over to me. Emma, that was bullshit, he said quietly. I've worked on 4 projects with you this quarter. You saved every single one of them. I know what you do. His words cracked something in me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and gathered my things. I walked back to my desk, my legs shaky, and opened my laptop. I needed to see if anyone had recorded the meeting or if it had been added to the company's Slack channel. What I found was worse. Someone had already posted a message in the team channel, a vague reference to tough feedback in reviews, and another person had replied with an eyes emoji. By the time I left the office that evening, I knew the story had spread. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, a half-eaten container of takeout next to me. I pulled up my personal folder, the one where I had been saving documentation for 2 years. There were dozens of files, project plans with my name as the creator, email threads where I had pitched ideas that later became company initiatives, analytics reports showing the success of campaigns I had built from scratch, client testimonials praising work that David had taken credit for. I had been collecting evidence without fully realizing what I was doing, and now it sat in front of me like a courtroom exhibit. I thought about quitting. I thought about going to HR, filing a complaint, demanding fairness, but I had seen how these things went. HR existed to protect the company, not the employee. Robert would deny everything. David's uncle would make calls, and I would be labeled a troublemaker. The system was designed to outlast people like me. So, instead, I opened a new document and started writing. I wrote down every project, every metric, every piece of evidence I had. I organized it into a timeline, clean and factual, no emotion, just data. If I was going to leave, I was going to leave with the truth documented. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Robert. His assistant scheduled me for 20 minutes at the end of the day. When I walked into his office, he was on his phone, finishing a call. He hung up and gestured for me to sit, his expression already impatient. I kept my voice steady. I want to understand the feedback from yesterday. You said my projects lack strategic thinking, but I'd like specific examples so I can improve. Robert sighed, leaning back in his chair. Emma, I don't have time to relitigate this. The feedback speaks for itself. Multiple people have expressed concerns. I pressed. Who? What concerns? Can you share the feedback so I can address it? Robert's face hardened. This isn't a negotiation. You need to accept the feedback and move forward. I felt anger rising, hot and sharp, cutting through the shame. I pulled out a printed spreadsheet from my folder. I brought data. This quarter, I managed 2 product launches that exceeded their lead generation goals by 30%. I wrote 25 blog posts that increased organic traffic by 40%. I ran the paid ads campaign that reduced our cost per lead to the lowest it's been in 2 years. Can you explain how that translates to least valuable? Robert glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. Those were team efforts. You can't take sole credit. I stared at him, the realization settling in with brutal clarity. This wasn't about performance. This was about power. About protecting David. About maintaining a structure where people like me stayed in our place. I stood up. My hands steady now. I'll be submitting my resignation tomorrow. Robert blinked, surprised, but recovered quickly. That's your choice, Emma. I hope you find somewhere that's a better fit. I walked out of his office and went straight to HR. I requested an exit interview, which they scheduled for the following week. Then I went home and drafted my resignation letter. It was short, professional, effective in 2 weeks. I didn't explain, didn't vent, didn't give them anything to use against me. I also started updating my LinkedIn, reaching out to my network, and applying to jobs. I had $15,000 in savings, enough to cover maybe 3 months of rent in San Francisco if I was careful. It wasn't much, but it was enough to bet on myself. The 2 weeks of my notice period were surreal. Word spread quickly that I was leaving, and reactions split cleanly down the middle. Some coworkers avoided me, as if my failure was contagious. Others, the ones who had also been overlooked, pulled me aside in hallways and whispered their own stories. A junior designer told me she had cried in the bathroom after her last review. A content writer said he had been job hunting for months. We were all trapped in the same system, and watching me leave felt like both a betrayal and a beacon. On my last day, I packed my desk into a single cardboard box, photos, a coffee mug, some notebooks. I walked out at 5 p.m. without fanfare, just a few quiet goodbyes to people I respected. As I crossed the lobby, Jake caught up with me. "Hey," he said, handing me a folded piece of paper. I wrote down my number. "If you ever need a reference or someone to vouch for your work, call me. I'm not going to stay quiet about this anymore." I thanked him, surprised by the solidarity, and left the building for the last time. For the first 2 weeks after I left TechVision, I let myself fall apart. I slept until noon, binge-watched shows, ate cereal for dinner. The shame of being called least valuable played on a loop in my head. Robert's voice echoing every time I thought about applying for jobs. But gradually, something else started to surface. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind, but cold and focused. I pulled out my documentation folder and looked at it with fresh eyes. This wasn't just evidence of my work. It was proof of a pattern, a system designed to erase people like me while propping up people like David. I decided to start small. I reached out to a few former coworkers who had left TechVision before me, people I had stayed in touch with loosely. Over coffee and video calls, I asked them about their experiences. The stories were hauntingly similar. Credit stolen, work minimized, David's name appearing where theirs should have been. One woman, Maria, told me she had been pushed out after raising concerns to HR about project attribution. Another, Chen, said he had been told his work wasn't strategic enough, the exact same phrase Robert had used with me. We weren't isolated cases, we were a pattern. One night, I opened a blank document and started writing a LinkedIn post. I debated for hours whether to publish it. Publicly calling out a company was risky. It could make me unhireable, could invite legal threats, could burn bridges, but staying silent felt like letting them win. I wrote about my experience without naming TechVision directly, framing it as lessons learned about recognizing toxic workplaces. I talked about credit theft, about the importance of documentation, about knowing your worth even when others don't see it. I hit publish at midnight, half expecting it to disappear into the void. By morning, the post had 500 likes. By afternoon, 2,000. Comments poured in, people sharing their own stories, tagging friends, thanking me for speaking up. Several people sent me direct messages asking if I was talking about TechVision. I didn't confirm, but I didn't deny either. The post went viral within the San Francisco tech community, shared in Slack channels and group chats. Within a week, 3 recruiters reached out asking if I was open to opportunities. One of those recruiters represented a marketing agency called Brightpoint, a boutique firm that worked with tech startups on brand strategy and growth campaigns. They were looking for someone to lead a new client services team. The salary was $95,000, a 27% increase from what I had been making. The interview process was refreshingly different. They asked me to present a case study of a campaign I was proud of, and I walked them through the TechVision product launch I had executed, showing the before and after metrics, the strategy decisions, the creative execution. The 3 partners who interviewed me asked sharp questions, pushed back on some of my choices, but ultimately nodded in approval. One of them, Grace, said she had seen my LinkedIn post and admired the courage it took to share that story. 2 days later, they offered me the position. I accepted immediately. Brightpoint was everything TechVision wasn't: collaborative, transparent, hungry for good ideas regardless of who they came from. My first project was a rebrand for a fintech startup, and I poured everything I had into it. Late nights, yes, but this time my name was on the work. When the campaign launched and drove a 50% increase in their user signups, the startup's CEO sent a thank you email that was CC'd to everyone at Brightpoint. Grace forwarded it to the whole agency with a note praising my work. It was the first time in 3 years I had felt seen. Meanwhile, back at TechVision, cracks were starting to show. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from Jake, who had become a reliable source, that things were falling apart. The 2 product launches I had been managing before I left had been handed to David. Without me to do the actual work, the campaigns were disasters. Launch dates got pushed back, messaging was inconsistent, paid ads burned through budget with nothing to show for it. The website redesign I had been leading stalled out entirely because no one else understood the content strategy. Clients started complaining. The enterprise client that had signed the $500,000 deal threatened to pull out, saying TechVision's marketing felt amateurish and disorganized. 6 months after I left, Jake told me Robert had been demoted. The VP of marketing, who had been largely hands-off, stepped in to assess the damage and realized how much had been mismanaged. Robert was moved to an individual contributor role, stripped of his team leadership. David, despite his uncle's board position, was placed on a performance improvement plan. The company was bleeding talent. 3 more people from the marketing team quit within 2 months of my departure. Morale was in the basement. I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a surge of vindication, but more than that, I felt free. I wasn't waiting for them to fail. I was building something better. Brightpoint promoted me to Senior Client Strategist after my first year, a title I had spent 3 years at TechVision chasing. My salary jumped to $120,000. I started speaking at marketing conferences, writing articles for industry publications, building a reputation that was mine, untethered to anyone else's shadow. Then, about 18 months after I left TechVision, I got an email. The subject line read, "Consulting Opportunity," and it was from Robert. My stomach turned when I saw his name. The email was stiff and formal, explaining that TechVision was looking for an external consultant to help stabilize their marketing operations and rebuild client relationships. He said they had heard about my work at Brightpoint, that my expertise would be valuable, and asked if I would be open to a conversation. The offer was $50,000 for a 3-month contract. I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply immediately with a single word, no. But I thought about Jake, about the few good people still trapped there. I thought about the documentation folder still sitting on my laptop. I called Grace and told her about the offer. She laughed, a sharp, surprised sound, and said it was my call but that I should charge them triple if I decided to even consider it. I drafted a response. I kept it short and professional. I thanked Robert for reaching out, acknowledged the offer, and politely declined. I explained that my current commitments at Brightpoint and my growing client base made it impossible to take on additional consulting work. I wished them well in finding the right partner. I didn't mention the irony. I didn't mention being called the least valuable employee. I didn't mention the stolen credit, or the gaslighting, or the way they had tried to make me doubt my own competence. I didn't need to. The email itself was the message. They had needed me all along, and now it was too late. Robert replied within an hour, asking if there was any number that would make it work, if I could do even a limited scope project. I didn't respond. 3 days later, David reached out on LinkedIn. His message was awkward, overly friendly, asking how I was doing and if I would be willing to grab coffee to discuss opportunities. I archived the message without reading it fully. 2 months later, I ran into someone from TechVision at a marketing conference in San Jose. It was Amanda, one of the few coworkers who had been kind to me. She pulled me aside during a networking break and told me the rest of the story. TechVision had hired a consulting firm to fix their marketing operations, paying them over $200,000 for 6 months of work. The consultants had essentially rebuilt everything I had created before I left. The company had lost 2 major clients permanently, and their revenue had dropped 20% year over year. David had finally been let go, his performance plan ending in termination. Robert had quit before he could be fired, taking a lower-level position at a startup no one had heard of. Amanda looked at me with something like awe. "You got out at the right time," she said. "We all knew you were the one holding it together. I just wish more of us had spoken up." I told her it wasn't too late, that she could still leave, that there were companies that would value her work. She nodded, thoughtful, and I gave her my contact information. That night, sitting in my hotel room after the conference, I thought about the quarterly review meeting that had shattered me. I thought about Robert's words, about the shame that had consumed me, about the months I spent questioning whether I was good enough. I thought about the documentation folder that had saved me, the LinkedIn post that had opened doors, the decision to bet on myself when no one else would. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I had been thinking about writing a longer piece, maybe an article or even a book, about recognizing and escaping toxic work environments. I started typing, the words flowing faster than they had in years. I wrote about pattern recognition, about documentation, about the importance of knowing your worth even when the world tells you otherwise. I wrote about the people who had supported me, Jake and Grace, and the others who had refused to stay silent. I wrote about the system that protects mediocre men while grinding down competent women, and how we dismantle it not by asking for permission but by building alternatives. I don't know if I will ever publish it. But writing it felt like closing a chapter, like transforming pain into purpose. TechVision is still operating, limping along with their reduced revenue and skeleton marketing team. I heard recently they are trying to rebrand, hiring a new VP of marketing who promises to turn things around. I wish them well, genuinely. Not because I have forgiven them, but because holding on to anger would only weigh me down. These days, I lead a team of 6 at Brightpoint. We just signed our largest client yet, a Series B startup that is paying us $300,000 for a year-long engagement. My work has been featured in Marketing Week and Ad Age. I speak on panels about building equitable workplaces and mentoring junior marketers. I make more money than I ever thought possible. And more importantly, I wake up excited about the work. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not fighting harder at TechVision, if I wish I had gone to HR or sued or made more noise. The answer is no. Leaving was the fight. Building something better was the revenge. Proving them wrong by succeeding without them was the victory. I learned that you don't need validation from people who refuse to see you. You don't need permission to know your worth. You just need the courage to walk away and the determination to build something they can never take credit for. So, if you have ever been told you are not valuable, if you have ever watched someone else take credit for your work, if you have ever questioned whether you are the problem, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. You are not imagining it. Document everything. Build your exit plan. And when you are ready, walk away with your head high. The people who diminish you are not the arbiters of your worth. You are.